back to MindXMotive. Let's dive into the nature side of this case now. Sheena Bora, a name that brings so much to the table in terms of psychological phenomena. Whether it's the psychopathic tendencies exhibited by Indrani or the cognitive distortions that led Sheena Bora to confess, deeming himself better than his companions. Our task at hand today is what can the mind tell us about the actions in this case? We have three people at the center of the prosecution's narrative here. Indrani Mukherjea, the media executive who presented herself as glamorous and powerful. Sanjeev Khanna, her former husband, and Sheena Bora, the driver who confessed. Before we talk diagnosis or motive, let's dissect the evidence. Forensic work in this case was complex. The state in which Sheena's remains were recovered was bad enough, charred and degraded, and the early handling by local authorities? Highly inadequate. That gap in the investigation made the job of reconstructing what really happened far harder, and it meant that psychology, interviews, confessions, and recorded behaviors took a heavier weight in shaping the narrative. The investigation being so lax is utterly confusing to me, since the beginning stages of it in 2015 was led by Rakesh Maurya, Mumbai's Commissioner of Police at the time, a man known for cracking the 1993 blasts and personally interrogating Ajmal Kasab after 2611. Maurya was sharp, methodical, and deeply respected. This case being rather high profile, Maurya ignored the chain of command, and even though he was too senior to be questioning a suspect, he personally questioned Indrani, but to no avail. Talking to her is like interrogating a condescending brick wall, based on a foundation of lies. Despite being such a capable lead, the case quickly fell apart once it landed in his hands. Chain of custody errors, mishandled forensic evidence, and conflicting witness statements all chipped away at the strength of what could have been a watertight case. It was a classic example of how even the most seasoned leadership can't save an interrogation plagued by systematic carelessness. So, after all this discussion, how do we think about the mind in a criminal case? Well, clinically, there's a few frameworks we can use: personality traits, disorders, situational stressors that change cognition, and cognitive distortions that permit morally objectionable acts. Let's discuss these one step at a time and look for signs in public records and testimony. First, personality traits and disorders. When criminal psychologists talk about crimes involving alleged deception or cruelty, they often look for signs of callousness, impulsivity, and manipulative behavior. These are traits that appear on the psychopathy spectrum. Public testimony and media reporting describe Indrani as highly image conscious, determined to control how she was seen in society. Some suggest leaving behind her children and first husband Siddharth Das was mostly for the cosmetic reason that they did not fit her aesthetic. She repeatedly presented Sheena as her sister rather than daughter, a long-time concealment. This act of concealment is not a personality diagnosis, but rather evidence of sustained deception, a willingness to construct a reality for social advantage. Her third husband, Peter Mukherjea, presented everything Indrani seemed to crave: sophistication, influence, and legitimacy in high society. As the CEO of Star India, he wasn't just a media executive, but he was one of the most powerful figures in the Indian television industry during its golden era. Under his leadership, Star became a household name. He was articulate, well-connected, and carried the sheen of success that Indrani desperately wanted to embody. Peter's life was polished and cosmopolitan, filled with media events, high-profile acquaintances, and an aura of prestige. Indrani had spent years trying to erase traces of her modest past, and Peter was her golden ticket out. Striving for independence, Or was it maybe Indrani's control? Peter left Star and co-founded INX Media with Indrani Mukherjea, launching channels like 9X and NewsX to make a mark in Indian television. The company later faced financial controversies, adding another layer to their high-profile public image. INX Media may have showcased Indrani's ambition and strategic acumen, but behind the glitz and business headlines was a mind clouded with darkness. To understand the control, manipulation, and deception she wielded, we turn to the lens of clinical psychopathy. And before any of you correct me, it's not psychopathy, it's psychopathy. Clinical psychopathy, properly assessed by trained clinicians with structured tools, involves emotional shallowness, lack of empathy, and instrumental use of others. I think all of us can agree that Indrani exhibited these characteristics to a T, the textbook definition of a psychopath, I believe. Second, impulse and situational triggers. Not all violent acts are born of personality disorders. Some occur when strong emotions, stressors, and immediate decisions collide. Consider the pattern in general testimonies. Episodes described by witnesses and interrogation records point to arguments, financial pressures, and complex relationships. In such a dynamic, an otherwise non-violent person might commit a sudden act. Alternatively, an already manipulative person might exploit a heated moment to escalate violence. Both possibilities change how we interpret the same evidence. By the looks of it, however, Indrani was always a cold and calculated woman, measuring every step she took, weighing the consequences of it on her public image. There is no scenario that we know of where Indrani was under any threat, especially none that Sheena would pose. Next, we move to confession and secondary corroboration, an area where Rai's statements matter. Rai initially confessed during the course of an unrelated arrest, saying he drove and assisted. Confessions complicate psychological interpretation. Are they truthful recollections, coerced statements, or attempts to bargain? The reliability of such confessions must be weighed against physical evidence. But in this case, the physical evidence was so degraded. This made the prosecution's case lean heavily on witness accounts and Rai's narrative. Cognitive distortions, you say? These are internal scripts people tell themselves to justify their actions. I did it to protect myself, or the end justified the means. These are examples of us changing what we know as reality for our actions to match our moral principles. They help us reduce cognitive dissonance. In interviews after the arrest, Indrani has vehemently denied involvement and asserted her innocence. She also made statements suggesting disbelief in the possibility that she could be convicted for something she claims she did not do. I find myself pondering this every time I think of this case. But is it just me that thinks her adamant denial of any wrongdoing on her part makes her seem more guilty? The constant shift of blame, especially onto Rahul Mukherjea, tends to make me trust her even less. Short, defiant lines like, "I've not been the perfect mom, but that doesn't make me a murderer," show a defensive narrative pattern, recasting culpability and centering herself in a story of victimhood. Those patterns are very familiar to clinicians that study moral disengagement. Moral disengagement is the process of convincing the self that ethical standards do not apply to oneself in a particular context. In fact, researchers and internet sleuths like me find her interactions with Vidhi, her daughter from her second marriage to Sanjeev Khanna, particularly interesting, as she seems to be the perfect mother. Is this caused by a guilty conscience trying to make up for her inability to be a good mother and be there for her other two children? Many public statements suggest Sheena was jealous of Indrani and Vidhi's relationship, constantly wondering What was wrong with her that her mother couldn't love her the same way she did Vidhi? A lot of strong emotions for a young woman to bear. When questioned about her relationship with Sheena, this is what Indrani had to say.
No, not really. I had a perfectly fine relationship with Sheena. I had a very good relationship with Sheena. Despite all the rumors people like to spread, I had a much closer relationship with Sheena than I have even today with my younger daughter Vidhi. You know, because the age gap in between me and Sheena was very less. You know, we were we became very, very close during the period when she was in Bombay.
Can't really say you're like sisters when you pretended to be, can you now? Now, let me make one thing very clear. None of this proves motive or guilt in court. What psychology offers is a framework to understand possible pathways explaining how history, personality, and immediate pressures can interact to make someone do something criminal. In this case, the balance of degraded forensics and compelling testimony means psychology becomes an important interpretive tool, but one that must be handled with a lot of care. When talking psychology, how can we not discuss body language and demeanor? All the interviews I have watched on Indrani, as well as the Netflix show, The Indrani Mukherjea Story, Buried Truth, I have one verdict. That woman has an inordinate ability to get under my skin. One of the first things that stands out to me isn't what she says, but how she carries herself. There's a kind of nonchalance about her posture, a cool detachment that contrasts sharply to the gravity of the case she stands accused in. Her upright shoulders during interviews, her head held back slightly, a posture that suggests someone in control, someone who wants to be seen as composed and infallible. This does not implicate guilt, but in the context of this story, it surely becomes a part of the narrative. Her facial expressions, my God, they seem to tell us a truth that she refuses to let up. At times, she offered a tight, measured smile, more rehearsed than spontaneous. Her smile is described by many viewers on Reddit as soulless and disconnected. Through the interpersonal deception theory given by Alicia L. Albus and Judy K. Burgoon, we understand that people trying to control a narrative often manage both words and body language. Phrases like "I believe" or "you must understand" with steady eye contact can steer a conversation. Indrani uses these cues repeatedly, yet her gaze sometimes drifts past the camera, hinting at what she's not saying. Then there are these moments where her eyes shift mid-question, or she tilts her head slightly and says something like, "That was then, this is now." The show's review notes that she couldn't care less in her tone. Her tone is too calm, which is disconcerting to most of us, especially based on the gravity of the accusations on her head. Everything she does seems to be a performance, not just for the camera, but for the public. It seems to always be her prerogative to control the light she's perceived in. As I've already explained, she seemed to do many things to maintain a facade of charisma and sophistication, which she may or may not have possessed. Indrani Mukherjea's body language walks a fine line between composure and calculation. Her stillness, her deliberate pauses, and that unwavering gaze all project control. Just, they also betray something deeper. It's the kind of poise that feels rehearsed, not natural. The more she tries to appear unshaken, the more it feels like she's holding something back. And in the court of public perception, that quiet confidence begins to look a lot like guilt. And with that, we come to the end of today's episode. As we close today's exploration of the nature side of the Sheena Bora case, remember, we've only begun to scratch the surface. Personality, impulse, and the cognition may explain part of the picture, but there's another layer: upbringing, environment, and family dynamics. That's where the story gets even more complicated. It takes the average person forever to comprehend their family dynamic, because at some point, it's not a family tree, but a family web. In our next episode, we'll dive into the nurture side, explore how Sheena's family, relationships, and childhood experiences may have shaped the events that unfolded. Tune in next time, because understanding the mind of this case requires looking at every single angle. Thank you for tuning in, and just remember, at the end of the day, when the act is over, the mind remains.